Are we witnessing the death of the dual sport motorcycle? Is this really the thumpacalypse? Not long ago, I was listening to Adventure Rider Radio, drawn in by a podcast that mentioned the end of the 650 single cylinder. The podcast led me to an article by Zach Kurlyk called The End of Big Thump on Canada Moto Guide. Both the article and the podcast were really convincing, and obviously Zach knows his stuff. You should definitely check out both the podcast and the article in the description below. In a nutshell, Zach points out three glaring reasons why big thumpers, namely cheap Japanese 650s like the KLR, DR, and XR, haven't been updated in decades, and why they might be done for. Reason one, which is more prominent in the Canada Moto Guide article, is that emission standards are getting more strict. Emissions for the single-cylinder KLR 650 are nearly double that of the twin-cylinder versus 650. So how do they keep selling KLRs? Well, it's like they're grandfathered in, and they can still be sold with 1980s emission standards. However, we don't see updates to these bikes because any change would mean having to pass the new and much more rigorous emission standards, and 650 singles just don't even stand a chance. So why are the big singles failing the emissions test? Well, according to Mr. Kurlyk, as the engine heats up and the piston rings deform, which burns more oil and emits more nasty carbon. Others cite that it may come down to the carburetors versus the electronic fuel injection. The second reason, which Zach brought up in the Adventure Rider Radio podcast, was that manufacturers are interested in the bottom line. They've got old tech that's had its R&D and machine work paid for probably more than a decade ago, many times over. And the bikes still sell like hotcakes in many markets, so why would manufacturers spend money to change something when it's already making plenty of cash, right? I mean, seriously, it's no different from the movie industry. Why would Hollywood executives risk money on a new idea or creative work when they can milk half a dozen films out of a hit book series or recycle old characters and stories again and again, you know? And the third reason is that, again, companies like to make money, and efficiency means money. Zach pointed out that big manufacturers want to produce engines that they can release in several different models, which cuts down on costs like research and development, materials, and especially when conforming to those draconian emission standards. A single-cylinder engine works really well in a dual-sport motorcycle, but does it work well in a street bike? Well, according to market demand, not so much. The fourth reason is the market itself. Sure, they may sell like hotcakes in some markets, but manufacturers are coming up against some weird dilemmas. Like, say you've got a lemonade stand and the lemonade sells really well, but you've got strawberry lemonade, which sells even better. Do you focus on what sells best or continue offering variety? Japanese manufacturers are all making good money with road bikes, and financially, it may not make sense to keep cranking out dual sports, unless they're the same tired old designs from decades ago. And if they cared about marketing them, how do they really do it? Dirt bikes have races and racers to sponsor and massive events and filled arenas, energy drinks and pee-wee leagues and all that. Road bikes are really sexy and sleek and look good on a poster, and they're fun to ride and very practical, and they're easy to make commercials about. Dual sports? Well, dual sports are just hard to sponsor. There aren't any dual sport races. They're not that sexy, at least not to most people, and they're less practical on the road than most road bikes, obviously. And that brings me to one final nail in the coffin. So the purpose of a dual sport, whoa, little bunny almost died, All right, okay, sorry, yeah, the purpose of a dual sport is to get off-road once in a while, and so not only are dual sports dying off because of all the emission standards, but the trails that we go on are getting shut down all over the country and all over the world. So there are some big, fat, and very logical reasons why big dual sport thumpers, even though they may be selling well right now, are a dying breed. They might indeed be the four horsemen of the thumpacalypse. I don't think they'll be dying off for a long time, but as far as updating the bikes goes, following Zach's logic, which I do, I don't think we'll see any updates for our favorite cheap 400s and 650 Japanese dual sports ever. And that really crushes me. I love the old Japanese thumpers, and the only solace I found was that the bikes are still selling so well, and they're grandfathered in, and the companies are making so much money on them that even if they're not updated, at least they won't be going anywhere until sales tank or emission standards get so strict that even grandfathered vehicles can't pass anymore, which would probably come first.
But then at least Japanese manufacturers will still make smaller, lighter, easier on the environment motorcycles like the WR250R, right? Well, more on that later. So some people might be asking what's wrong with a twin cylinder. Well, not much really. I think twin cylinder bikes feel great. There's plenty of smooth power throughout the revs, easier on the environment, and manufacturers can crank them into several bikes, which in theory should make parts and maintenance cheaper, right? Well, twin motors are typically, not always, but typically a little heavier, a little less torque, more intensive maintenance, more complicated, and more expensive. So one of the biggest reasons guys like me love a dual sport thumper is because of the torque and the ease of maintenance and the simplicity, the reliability, and mostly because they're ridiculously cheap in comparison, both to buy new and to buy used.
However, technology is getting better. Engines are getting lighter, more efficient, and smarter. Little engines like the WR250R are handling massive amounts of miles with high efficiency and very little maintenance, despite the little engines run at higher revs which inflict more wear argument. The issue is power. The WR250R produces decent power from its little single, but the Honda 250L is a bit sluggish in comparison.
Other 250 singles that I've tried, which may or may not have been made in China, and I probably should never talk about again, were utterly gutless.
So even if the big thumpers slowly go the way of the Buffalo, we've still got the crop of semi-modern small singles that will get us long into the future, right?
Right? Unfortunately, that's where things could get really, really ugly. Recently, the forums and groups have been alight with this news, which I couldn't 100% confirm is true or false, that the WR250R has been discontinued.
The Japanese website called WeBike has some iffy translations that indicate that the WR250R is done for. There's a link for that in the description.
I truly hope that this is just fake news in the moto world, but Chronicles of Solid put out a really good video about it, which you can check out by clicking the card in the upper right corner. And this is really, really bad news for all dual sport.
Yamaha's WR was Japan's most modern, mass-produced dual sport, and if even their small displacement 250 is getting the hatchet, all dual sports are in trouble.
And some say that it will be back once they restrict the airbox to clean up emissions even more. Others say it's gone for good, blaming emission standards for its demise. And then there are some who say the sales were poor, while others say the sales were fantastic. You know, maybe they're just canning it in some markets and not worldwide. Perhaps Yamaha is scrapping it to go all in on the new T7 so they're not competing with themselves. All of it is just speculation at this point, but there was one comment in iBar that caught my eye from Rob A.
He says, there was something mentioned in Dirt Bike magazine that something along the lines of a serious dual sport bike is coming from the Japanese soon. I wonder if Yamaha is doing it. I can see Yamaha taking the plunge. Honda seems too conservative. Suzuki and Kawasaki like to rest on their laurels too much. Yamaha has been the only one to make an attempt at KTM with their FX, WR, and two-stroke X models, although Suzuki's DRZ is due for a makeover. My only hope is that whatever comes out isn't some compromised bike with a street bike engine and mediocre suspension. I would basically like to see a taggable race bike that's not orange.
And man, Rob, I hope you are right. It would be amazing to see something new from Japan, something that appeals to the dual sport roots while still getting an update. Affordable, reliable, long maintenance intervals, decent for taking a shred through the trails, all the way to a trip around the world if you wanted. The things that we love about the aging Kawasaki's and Hondas and Yamahas and Suzuki's, stuffed into a sexy new chassis with a little more power than the 250s, but a little less weight than the old 650s. In my opinion, the aging DRZ 400 is already that bike, so I get giddy just thinking about an updated version that's lighter and more efficient and better suspended. So best case scenario, they're just making way for an updated dual sport lineup. Worst case? Well, I'm afraid that the logic of Zach Kurlyk is pretty sound, and I fear that the Thumper's second wind is just not gonna happen. Thumpers, even the small ones, may be dead. Emission standards are too strict. R&D is too expensive. The market is more interested in high-performance, high-maintenance dirt bikes or more practical and more efficient street bikes. It's heartbreaking, but logic tells us that the thumpacalypse is truly upon us. I sincerely hope that Japan proves Zach and me very, very wrong.
So what do we do? Well, leave a comment below and make sure to comment with any news so those who are following the video can get updates on recent news and articles that you post. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to subscribe and click the bell icon for notifications when I upload my next videos.
Thank you so much for watching, ladies and gentle tubers. Much love to y'all. eveRide out.